participants who are there. So we'll start the session now. So once again, good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to the session of decoding labor compliances, labor codes. My name is Prashant Singh. Along with me, I have my colleague and subject matter expert, Munab Ali Beg. There's a small change in the plan. We had Rishi Agarwal, who was the CEO of Avantis RegTech. He's my colleague and takes care of the technology piece. Due to some medical and exigency, personal exigency, he couldn't join this session. We would be taking this session going forward. And Munab is going to be the subject matter expert who is going to take care of the micro discussions of all the labor codes and the question answers. So with that, we would like to start the presentation. First slide. So friends, as you all know, that we had been talking about compliances, we had been talking about codes in last couple of months. Government had been doing various announcements, various notifications have come. But what we need to know is that what is the current regulatory cholesterol which we have in India? It's really important to understand the overall dynamics. This slide talks about, the various cuts of India's regulatory environment. If you look at in this sheet, it talks about more than 69,000 compliances which we have in India. It has been divided into acts, compliances, and filing. If you look at labor compliance, which is one of the biggest, has 463 acts. It has more than 32,000 compliances and 3,000 filing every year. Similar is the case with industry specific, where we have 484 acts and around 18,000 compliances, 1,262 filings, and so on and so forth. You look at, it has been divided into different 7 buckets: labor, industry specific, secretarial, commercial, general, finance, taxation, and EHS, which is environmental, health, and safety. Now, this entire thing constitutes around 69,000 compliances, more than 1,500 acts, and 3,500 filing. Nowhere in the world we have such a complex compliance, world. You talk about European nation, you talk about South Asian countries, nowhere it is so complex. We are in the way to progress and see that how we can digitize, simplify, and rationalize these compliances. And that's what we are going to talk about in these slides, with all those specifics which we have seen in last 6 months being notified, announced by various governments and central government. Let's move to the next slide. This is just to give you a clean and clear picture on number of acts, compliances, and filing. What I'm going to do is to give you a macro view of number of acts, which talks about 1,536 in total. Out of that, 463 is labor code only, labor acts, which talks about 30% of the total 1,500 plus acts. If we talk about compliances, there are 69,233 compliances, which is required by across industry, across sectors, across nation. Out of that, we have 32,500 plus labor compliance only. Majority of all of us, are involved day to day in labor compliances along with other compliances also. But this has 47% of the total percentage of 69,000. So you can understand how many, how much manual intervention, how many ad hoc jobs we need to do. Similar is the case of filings, where filing, if you look at it, 6,600 plus, and out of that 3,048 is labor compliance, which is 46%. So this is just a bird eye view for all of you, where you would like to see that how important and how critical the compliance is in India today. I have with me Munab, who is on the screen now. He's a subject matter expert, and he would be taking all the rest of the slide, which talks about the micro piece of compliances, codes, and whatever we have seen in last 3 to 4 months time. Next slide, please. And Munab, over to you to take the details from here.
Thank you, sir. See, the labor codes initially started by the central government by amalgamation of all the central legislations. There are 44 central legislations identified to make simplification and ease of doing business. They made into 4 labor codes. So this initial setup will have more burden in place of license and permits. If any medium-sized establishment, if it is started, they have to undergo various different license and permits under existing labor laws. That is, you have to have a EPF code, ESIC code, labor welfare fund registration, shop and establishment or factory registration. Similar way, interstate migrant workmen, payment of gratuity need to submit a notice of opening. Similar way, internal committees intimation has to be submitted, registration of the principal employer, factory license, MSME registration. Likewise, there are various license and permits required to establish a small or medium size of establishment. So it is a big burden that various departments were involved in it, and there are various authorities involved. There is a various timeline, threshold limit. So the burden is increased in place of getting the permissions or license or registrations through the government. When it comes to returns is similar intimation will be duplicated in various ways. There is an employment exchange, which talk about biannual return. When it comes to professional tax, some of the states follow monthly, some of the states quarterly, half yearly, yearly. When it comes to contribution of labor welfare fund, some of the states follow, some of the states doesn't follow the labor welfare acts itself. So it differs from state to state. When it comes to maternity benefit, it is annually, return need to be filed. When it comes to bonus, annual return, there are self-certification need to be submitted by ITES in various states. Similar way, when going to factories, shop and establishment, working women in the night shift need to be intimated. Some of the states still have required the establishment to have a permission from the labor department before engaging the women. All these returns need to be submitted by every establishment. When it comes to registers, there is no provision of common registers maintained under it. You have to have 4 or 5 overtime registers. One is under shop and establishment, one is under minimum wages, one is under payment of wages. The common data used, nothing but you'll be maintaining the day-to-day attendance and wage components. But when it comes to the legislation, they have set of different names of the registers, and the particular registers have to be maintained separately for that particular legislation itself. The format or form name and rule name, it differs from state to state because the states were derived as such. When it comes to payment of bonus, deductions or fine registers, muster rolls, accident books, contractor registers, register of hoist and waste, all this various registers need to be maintained by every establishment. There are n number of registers, and moreover, it is duplication of maintaining a similar register for different set of legislations. Next slide. Yeah, when it comes to safety items, the EHS, when we talk about the EHS, exhaust fan and humidity register between the machines, what is the distance need to be maintained, lighting and ventilation, dust, all this first aid, glare provisions, all these various different parameters were fixed by the different states, and every parameter need to be followed by the manufacturing as well wherever it is applicable. The industry applicability, accordingly, they have to make all the safety provisions for that employees. When it comes to displays, even the lift has to have a display of what is the load capacity. If it is a goods lift, you should have to display this. When it comes to first aid, the fire safety, the exit signs and assail marking has to be made in the floor. When it comes to abstract and notices, there are minimum 8 different abstracts for a factory or canteen. All this has to be displayed in the notice board in a conspicuous place. Some of the states' requirement is such that they have to maintain in a local language as well the majority of the employees' language and English. So it make various confusions and various different abstract need to be displayed in the notice board. Similar way, when it comes to child labor, you need to declare that you will be not engaging the child labor. Same way, local language has to be maintained, and the name of the inspector, notice of the holidays, weekly holidays, timing of the work, wage payment date, all this need to be displayed in the notice board. So when it comes to record keeping, there is no point of common record keeping, and there is no time limit for common record keeping, because the legislation differ. When it go to minimum wages, it says that only 6-month data. When it come to payment of bonus, it says that 3 years data. When it come to ESI PF, currently they intimated that it will be restricted to 5 years. But certainly we can see that still many of the legislations not decided with the time limit for the record keeping. They may go for 10 years, they ask for 15 years also. Right from the beginning, they may ask. But the legislation is not clearly defined that there is no common time limit to maintain a preserve of data of existence. So ambulance room, so all these various registers need to be maintained and preserved. Timeline, there is no timeline to preserve such documents. We need to maintain for a long duration. Chandra, next. Yeah. See, various committees need to be constituted, and it required certain committees to be registered under the authorities, and procedural activities, minutes of meeting, and actions taken against the complaints received. All this needs to be recorded, like safety committee, canteen committee, welfare, POSH, grievance redressal. Likewise, the committees need to be formed under this existing legislation, and it need to be maintained. Record keeping and all the action taken, everything has to be recorded properly. When it comes to intimation, even the factory manager change has to be intimated within 50 days, some of the states even 30 days. When it comes to national and festival holiday working, some of the states required period intimation to the authorities that you will be working on national festival holidays. When it comes to amendments, you need to send an intimation within 30 days of certain changes in standing order. Similar way, when it go to accident, within 24 hours or within 48 hours, based on the accident, all this accident report, annual holiday intimations, a change of contractor. When you change the contractor, the intimation has to be submitted, or the commencement and completion intimation has to be submitted. Same way when it comes to plan approval, where the plan is approved by the authorities, where you're making a small change, also you have to intimate in advance to the authority before you're making such changes. So this and all the current practically very large scale of compliance requirements will be following as such. But the labor reform was simplified a bit, but not much. However, we'll see that what are all the changes imposed under the new labor codes. Chandra. So currently, we could see that we identified that the legislations, all the legislations attracted only 9% of the current labor force. And in total, in India, only 9% of laborers were covered under current legislation. It means that around 91% of the laborers were working in an unorganized sector. They were not covered under any of the legislations. So many of the loopholes were identified, and the reform has addressed to cover the maximum workforce, even from unorganized sector. So current issues, the first issue will be seeing that no provision for gig worker, platform worker, and fixed term employment in the labor law. So if you hire a fixed term employment, or if you have a gig worker or platform worker who do the cab facility, Ola, Uber, or delivery services, all there will be called as a delivery partners, or they will be working as a partners of the particular establishments. So they will be not paid for that what they work. They will be not paid or not fixed with the minimum wages or minimum payments to be made for them. So certainly they will be not attracted with the statutory obligation and labor laws at present. Several different registrations and licensing exemptions. As I told you, there are various registration. For a small set of company, it required minimum 13 to 14 different set of registration and licenses. It is mandatory to run, even though many of the exemptions has been given till it is required. When it comes to multiplicity returns and registers with redundancy of duplication and overlook, as I told you, if you take one muster roll, there are 13 different muster rolls you need to maintain for a set of factory. When it comes to shop and establishments, in the similar way, one or two maybe differ from state to state. When it comes to register of fines, there are 4 different register of fines you need to maintain under the legislation. The data will be common, but the duplicacy will happen repeatedly for a similar purpose, different format name and different legislation, but the data which is provided is common. different applicability threshold under different act. There is no common threshold limit for applicability. For example, if there is no 50 employees, you have to have certain registration. That one particular registration will cover you all this. If you have 100 employees, in that case, you have to have this particular registrations. Likewise, there is no derived. There is a different applicability threshold under different states. When it comes to one state, the threshold limit will start from 20, other state maybe from 50, other state maybe from 100. Commonly in India, there is no common threshold limit for its applicability. Every state have their own set of different threshold limit for applicabilities. So many definitions for the minimum wages. So the minimum wages is not common for across the nation, across the state. When it go to jurisdictionally or geographically, it differs from one location to other location. When we take up in Bangalore, one minimum wages is paid to Electronic City. The other 1 kilometer, the minimum wages differs. Hardly 10% differs. So likewise, there are different set of minimum wages fixed by the authorities, and it differs from state to state, industry to industry. And specifically, when we talk about geographically also, it differs from one to other. So there is no common platform for fixing of minimum wages. There is no common parameters to fix the minimum wages. Different authorities were responsible for enforcement and inspection. For example, as I told you, when it comes to labor department, the payment of bonus will be handled by the other authority. When it comes to shop and establishment, minimum wages will be other authority. Maternity benefit will be the other authority. CLRA will be the other authority. There are n number of authorities behind every legislation. Anytime they can come for an inspection without intimating in advance. They may ask for any set of documents for any period which is not defined in the act. There may be a chance of surprise inspection and asking for a number of documents. So all these practical issues has to be identified as a current issues. So current different definitions of the establishment and workman and wages. When it go to every legislation, we need to be very carefully see that who is the workman, who's defined as an establishment, who's an employer, how the wages is defined. So there are different threshold limits, or wage definition has been given as a cap to define the workman, an employee, or establishment of wage. So there are differ from one legislation to other legislation. Labor union can go on strike. Other than the essential services, it is open for a labor union can go for a strike. So a lot of scope of physical interaction between employer and the government. So there is no technology platform or the intimation through to the authorities over the mail communication, or there is no as such technology platform to reduce the physical interaction and make everything digitally recorded. So the physical interaction will make the inspector Raj will be in the higher side. So the lot of physical scope and physical interaction has to be identified as a current issue. Chandra, next slide. So this labor codes, what to address the reform. The first thing will be extend the scope of coverage labor laws, including the greater percentage of the workforce in India. We identified only 9% of the labor force are attracted with the current legislation. This labor code is supposed to cover the entire piece, even the unorganized sector, unemployed establishment. All this has to be attracted to cover this under this code. So reduce the elimination, the ambiguity of interpretation. So applicability, threshold, all this has to be eliminated. One common threshold for pan-India level, it has to be recommended. Simplified license and registration. So all this deemed approval and online filing of approval and timing and on making the payment auto renewal, all this needs to be implemented in this code to simplify the procedural of license or registration permissions from the Labor Department. Reduce the compliance burden by reducing the applicable acts and compliances. As I told you, 44 central legislation governed can be made as a 4 labor codes now. Similar way, the other legislation also has to be identified and reduced as a very few number of labor legislation to be applicable for the set of establishment. The fifth one is reduce the regulatory record keeping burden. There is certain time limit has to be given for the establishment to restrict them not to make all the records to be preserved for an unlimited period. There is a specific period need to be recommended by the acts. Remove all redundancy of records. As I told you, there are 7 to 8 register of wages, 4 different accident registers, 10 different format of muster roll, 3 different format of fine reductions. All this has to be reduced. One common register or 1 or 2 common registers need to be recommended under the code. Reduce the inspector Raj, all the self-certification or third-party inspection, all this to be recommended under the code to reduce the inspector Raj, the inspector picture only when it comes any employee complaint or any accident occurs. During the time only the inspector is supposed to enter into it. There is an option to be given as a self-certification and third-party certification. Make all interaction with the department as a in digital way. So it will make all interactions recorded on all the inspection or documents submitted, everything to be recorded in a proper way. So provide greater flexibility to the employer to increase or decrease or open or close the business without any hazard. So make labor union more accountable in terms of engaging the in terms of strike or any negotiation or any disputes in between the labor and the employer. So the first foremost thing we'll be seeing that the highlights of the labor reforms, what and all has been identified where the labor laws were given a major picture. The landscape, as I told you initially, the central legislation, 44 central governed legislations were identified, made into 4 different labor codes. That is, during the process, they identified 15 legislations were not given any support function to the employees and it repeals. From 2016, there are 226 sections were eliminated and final outcome of 1,232 sections as made into 480 sections. There are 67% of reduction we can able to see in the labor laws legislations. Next. So this is generally the 4 labor codes. The first one is OSH code, which attract with the 13 legislations, social security codes cover with 9 legislations, industrial relations code cover with 3 legislation, code on wages 4 legislation. I don't want to spend more time in this. We'll go to next slide. So this is the current and proposed. The proposed nothing but based on the draft rule framed by the central government, which has identified that what change at present, what change the new rule has been derived. In this code on wages, we see that 3 returns and 12 registers, which has been reduced to 1 return and 2 registers. In place of 12 registers, it is reduced to 2. Code on industrial relation, there is no changes as such, 2 registration. Code on social security, in place of 4 registration, they made into 1 registration. In place of 36 different returns, it made into 4 returns, and more than over 20 registers required to be maintained under the code, it made as a 1 single register. When it comes to OSH code, there are 4 different licenses and 11 registrations were recommended at present. But the new code proposed 1 license and 1 registration. When it comes to returns, there are 22 different returns were applicable on them. It made into 1 single return, and 76 different registers need to be maintained under OSH code, which made into only 3 registers required to be maintained under the labor code. Chandra, next. So what the key points in this reform? The reform, the first thing will be the fixed term employment. This code widely for all the states and union territories can engage a fixed term employment. The fixed term employment is nothing but if for a time being period, for a time slot, if you got a project, you want to engage with someone for a 6-month period, which the current legislations were not recommended to do it. You have to have them in an on role and a permanent role. There may be a chance of permanency, and there may be a chance of disputes can be raised by the certain employee after completion of the project if you terminate them. But here, the fixed term employment, nothing but you can hire them directly without involving any third party. Direct agreement, you can hire any employee for a fixed duration, maybe 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, any period. You can hire them on a fixed term contract. once they complete the contract, automatically the contract ends. They will be not allowed to challenge for the permanency. As well, they are not required to make any compensation under industrial dispute issues. So it will give certain employer to run a trial base for any employee hiring. They can hire them on a trial base. They can see that after that they can hire them in a permanent role, or for a time being a temporary project on depending on a third party. Other than that, they can hire directly through the contractor for a number of employees. And the eligibility for claiming the permanency will not occur. Similar way, they can't challenge for industrial dispute for termination of service. Similar way, when it comes to fixed term employees, the benefits as like your regular employees, leave benefits, ESI, PF, all the statutory benefits as like regular employees. Only thing, the threshold limit will be not applicable on them. For a gratuity purpose, we know that it is a 4-year, 240 days is required for 6 days working establishment. Here, for a fixed term employee, if he completes 1 year, he has to be paid for 1 year gratuity. Likewise, every 6 months completion over about it, he will be eligible for the gratuity. The similar calculation as we follow for our regular employees. So extent of labor law coverage, including gig worker, platform worker. This code says that there is a special scheme will be governed by the central and state government to cover the gig worker and platform worker and home-based worker for social security benefits. So the aggregator, who's the employer of this gig worker and platform worker, have to make the payment of 1% of their annual turnover or 5% of the wages paid, service charges paid to the gig worker, contribution from their side for the social security benefits. When it comes to manager and supervisor are now covered under overtime regulation, because the code on wages very clearly says that the definition of employee attracted all the employees, including the managers, other than the person who's having unlimited control, like CEO, CFO, or the managing director. Other than that, everyone will be treated as employees. Previously, there are threshold limits, 21,000, 18,000, all the threshold limits has been moved out. Now, widely it covers all the employees. So as per code on wages, any employee works more than the regular working hours, they have to be paid with a double rate of his normal wages for the overtime working. So the manager and supervisor also will get attracted with the overtime regulations. When it comes to wage payable to the employee, we know that on termination, we need to make the payment within 2 working days. Now the resignation also added into it. So the HR people will have a burden of closing down all this within 2 working days of the final settlement, even the resignations. When it comes to applicability threshold, for a retrenchment or layoff, for a period permission from the authority were increased. Many of the states already increased during the COVID period from 100 to 300. Now this code says that it is for all the states, the applicability has been increased to 300. Any retrenchment or layoff up to 300 workmen establishment or factories not required to have any permission from the authority, but they need to be submitted. That will be clarified by the respective state rules and as well the central rules. But when it comes to permission, if it is more than 300, definitely it required period permission from the authority to retrench or layoff. When it comes to model standing order, when it go to standing order, applicability threshold also increased. Many of the states already increased to 300. Some of the states still maintain 100, but this code has increased the threshold to 300 and introduced a reskilling fund as an additional burden to the employer. Whenever they retrench the employees, terminate the employees, other than the retrenchment compensation, additionally 15 days average wage to be paid to the government as a reskilling fund. This fund will be recredited after 45 days, of retrenchment to the employee. But certain terms and conditions are not clarified even in the draft rule. So process has been laid down to recognize the trade union authorized negotiation for the behalf of the employer. So certain recognition, because there are a number of trade unions will be available in one factory or one industrial establishment. In that case, which trade union to be recommended, which union will be authorized to do the negotiation with the employer, or there is a committee needs to be formed, negotiation committee needs to be formed. In that case, how to choose the members of the various trade unions, all this has been clarified and given in the labor codes. So a notice 14 days in advance need to be given for any strike. Any strike, the employees need to give a minimum 14 days in advance, and employees were restricted to go on strike in case of any cancellation or arbitration proceedings is in pending or in process. So in that case, employees are restricted to go on strike. Once they're given a notice, there is a chance of cancellation or arbitration, or any tribunal can be taken up the matter for the hearing purpose. During the course, the employees are restricted to go for a strike. Process for dispute management, employee and employer, likely to be simplified, because there is a platform going to be introduced by the central government, which is going to cover all the complaint and hearing, all this dispute matters to be accommodated in the technology platform for future reference. So there may be a chance this technology platform will give a future reference for any set of establishment, what the dispute raised, all this can be referred in future. Chandana, next. Provisions for cover under ESIC for informal sector. As I told you, one employee establishment also, they can go for voluntary coverage for ESIC. The ESIC coverage is extended now. They may go for a voluntary coverage after this code implementation. Various different slab employees contribution to EPF. There may be a chance of a central government by notification, different slab rate may be imposed. The option has been given in the code. Provision to bring an informal worker under ages of minimum wages, because the code on wages covers all the employees. Only the condition says that record keeping burden will be where 5 or more employed establishment. So the code cover everyone. For record keeping burden alone has been relaxed for that less than 5 employees establishment. No need to keep any record as such. But wherever 5 or more are there, they have to maintain all the records of minimum wages. All this will be applicable to everyone. When it comes to gratuity is become eligible for a fixed term. As I told you, in the fixed term employee who's completed 1 year, he'll be eligible for a gratuity payment, even for 1 year. Whenever he crosses more than 6 months, 1 year, 6 months, in that case, he will be eligible for 2 years gratuity. As like our regular employees, all the benefits need to be given other than the eligibility period. Contract workers employed through an unlicensed contractor will be treated as a direct employees of the principal employer. Financial penalties has been increased, because previously we know that non-record keeping will go for a 5,000 rupees of any register not maintained, and max to max it will go for 3 lakh rupees. But here the code recommends that if employer failed to maintain a registers, in that case the fine may go from 50,000 rupees. The maximum fine amount has been increased to 10 lakh rupees. So there is an option of compounding of offenses. If any jail term imprisonment has been pronounced by the court, in that case, they can make a higher side, 50% of the higher side fine amount as a compounding, and they can avoid the terms of jail imprisonment. So recognition of migrant workmen. We know that the migrant workman at present, it is very difficult. He has to be hired from one state to other state through a contract and through the employment exchange. Then only they will be treated as an interstate migrant workman. But the code very simplified the term. Any person move from one state to other state whose wages are 18,000, he will be treated as an interstate migrant workman. It not required through a contractor with the knowledge, without the knowledge of the employer, on his own or through a other person, he will be moved from one state to other state. All this has been removed. Any person hired, if his domicile is other state, he moved to other state for his work purpose. If he's appointed over there, in that case, if his wages are 18,000 or less, he will be treated as an interstate migrant workman. Same way, the migrant workman has to be extended certain facilities. So the government will be recognized as portal will be provided to register the migrant workman in the portal, and employer have to make once in a year the journey allowance, the train charges, the third class sleeper train charges to his native town. has to be paid once in a year. Whether he travels or not, it will be an additional cost to the principal employer to make it. In a similar way, decided to give a helpline number by the central and state government, and PDS services, public distribution services systems, will be extended even to the migrant workmen. Eligibility for earned leave. Previously, we know that industrial establishment or factories, the eligibility earned leave will be 240 days of working in the present year. In the subsequent year, they will be credited with 15 days earned leave. Here, the term 240 has been reduced to 180 days for the eligibility, and additionally, the leave need to be calculated 1 day for every 20 days of work. So the subsequent year and 15 days standard limits has been removed. If any employee works in the year, if completes 180, thereafter he need to be credited 1 day for every 20 days of work in the same calendar year. So it is a change that 240 to 180. So now we'll see that what are all the draft rules of the central recommends. Maybe the state rules, maybe the copy from the central draft rules. There are certain changes may be made by the state government to operational free, but widely we can able to see that the draft rule published by the central government come as like 75%. Similar may be maintained in the state governments. The first one is the draft central code on wages rule, which is the code on wages, the central rule. First thing is minimum wages. The concept of national minimum floor wages has been introduced. We know that the central government going to fix the national floor minimum wages. The state government, while fixing the minimum wages, they are not allowed to fix less than the minimum national floor minimum wages fixed by the central government. It's going to be a big task for the north and east states, because they have very less when it compared to west and south states. They will be very in higher side payments. When it comes to national floor minimum wages, the central government is not yet disclosed which committee, who's going to fix this, how it will be derived. Certain clarification, certain committee information, or certain members of the particular decision authorities are not yet notified. So they just silent in this process. The state government go and notify minimum wages above the national floor minimum wages. Central government has constituted a technical committee for the purpose of skills, identifying the skills and recognizing the skills, because there are skill sets will be given for the minimum wages. Till date, there are ambiguity in fixing the employees in a particular skills, whether they will come under the skill category or unskilled category or semi-skill category. So central government has constituted a committee. They identified 681 type of different designation, and they accommodated in this 4 different skills. So this committee has identified the 4 different skills, and they accommodated 681 type of designations. When it comes to working hours and overtime, this code very clearly says that the overtime related clarification of OSH, the factories will be not applicable on this. So this wage related code clarification on overtime, which is not applicable to the factories. This is for purpose of central rules. We need to wait for the state rule. The similar may be notified, or there may be a chances. Normal working days will be comprised of only 8 hours. And it says that total interval hours not to exceed 1 hour. So in that case, any tea break, any lunch break or breakfast, all this put together, all the break times not to exceed 1 hour. Previously, we know that clearly defined 1 hour break has to be provided after 5 hours of work, or 4 hours of work, or 6 hours of work. 30 minutes break need to be provided after 4 hours of work. All this has been removed, and say that very clearly maximum 1 hour break need to be provided to the employee. Maybe you'll have one set as a 1 hour, or 2 set, or 3 set, or 4 set. However, the employer allowed to make the changes certainly, but total break hour not to exceed 1 hour. Overtime wage will need to be paid at least twice the regular wages. We know that during the COVID period, many of the state published that normal wages need to be paid for the overtime purpose, and there are certain states notified that 1.5 times has to be paid for overtime. All this has been removed, and overtime definitely it will be the double the normal wages, not on basic wages, double the normal rate of wages. Employees who work on weekly rest day will be eligible for overtime wage payment, which is many of the states go with the compensation, many of the states go with the overtime wage payment. This court clarified that he is eligible for overtime wage payment. Daily and hourly rate of wages, calculation, how to calculate daily wages, how to calculate hourly wages, all this clarified under this draft rule. Process of fixing floor wages. As I told you, the fixing of floor wages still it is unanswered the question, but there are certain rules derived by the central government, but certainly the committee and the person or chairperson or members of the particular committee has not yet disclosed. Chandana. So process of reduction and recovery, similar way, the not to exceed 50% of the total wages, and there are prescribed ways for the deductions. When it comes to payment of bonus, here the twist is the principal employer is responsible even for the contractual employees bonus payment. If contractor failed to make the payment to the contractual employees, in that case, the principal employer has to recover certain amount from the contractor bill and make the payment to the contractual employees. When it comes to wage slip, the code recommend that a form 5 in the format only the wage slip has to be issued to the employees. Timely payment. When it comes to timely payment, the principal employer to make timely payment, to contractor to enable the contractor to make the payment. Here, the responsibility of the principal employer increased by way of principal employer have to make the payment on time to the contractor, because the contractor not to say to the contractual employees that he has not got the payment, so that he is not making the payment on time. So it has become a responsibility of the principal employer to revisit the contracts, whether revisit the contract or make a certain arrangements of on-time payment to the contractors. Inspection scheme, because as I told you, there is an inspection scheme introduced under it. There are online inspection and certain time limits will be given for the uploading all the documents, and the code is silent about the procedural part of the inspection scheme. Register and record. As I told you, there are wage, overtime, fine, deduction, damage, loss has to be maintained in form 1, one single register, and employee register in form 4. Draft rule has provided the formats of this particular 2 different registers. Chandra. Yeah, the next one is industrial relations rules, central industrial relations rules. Here the standing order has, as I told you, employer are required to intimate the concerned certifying officer in case of adopts the model standing order. Previously it was silent that if you not registered the standing order, in that case the model standing order will be automatically applies. But this code very clearly says that even though if you want to maintain the model standing order, you need to intimate the authority in writing that you will be following the model standing order. There is a, as I told you, the threshold limit for standing order registration has been increased from 100 to 300. Conciliation proceedings. So Samadhan, as I told you, the Samadhan portal has been introduced, digital record for all the conciliation proceeding or dispute raised by the employees or employee unions. All this will be recorded, and any awards passed by the conciliation officer or arbitration and the any industrial tribunals, all this will be recorded in this Samadhan portal. It will be preserved. Strike and lockout. Notice of strike and lockout also has to be given in an electronical way, not in writing. The electronical way, in the portal, they have to enroll all this information about the strike and lockouts. When it comes to layoff or retrenchment or closure, the notice of layoff or retrenchment and closure need to be intimated electronically to the employees. Permission of layoff or retrenchment or closing down to be granted electronically by the authority. There are deemed approval process has been introduced in it. Every application of retrenchment, strike, lockout has given a time limit of 60 days from the date of application. If authority failed to approve or reject or put some queries under it, automatically the portal will reflect that it is deemed approval. So the process of retrenchment or layoff or closing down can be taken over after the deemed approval timeline. Worker reskilling fund. When it comes to worker reskilling fund, as I told you, wherever the employees were terminated, retrenched, in that case, the employer have to make the 15 days average payment of employee to the reskilling fund. So this payment has to be made within 10 days of last retrenched. last day of the worker. Within 10 days, it has to be made, and the employer have to give who's the employee retrenched, all his bank intimation, all this to recredit by the government to the respective employee's bank account directly. So this is an additional burden to the employer. Wherever he retrenching the employees, his bank account, other information has to be given to the department. Along with that, 15 days wages has to be credited to the as a reskilling fund. Chandra. So occupational safety and health rules by the central government. When it comes to registration, new registration need to be registered electronically in Shamshuida portal, because it is a central portal. So central rule has been recommending to Shamshuida portal. So existing establishment already registered under any other central labor law, they need to re-register in the Shamadan portal within 6 months. Already you are registered under Shamshuida portal. In that case, again, that given time of code implemented within 6 month time period, again they have to re-register. It means that the portal going to be upgraded and amalgamation with the other activities. So it requires that within 6 month time, they have to go and re-register the required center wherever they got it. Form 1 has been prescribed electronically within 60 days of commencement of this code. So any application need to be filed in Form 1, which electronically has to be filed to the authorities. So annual health examination, as I told, any employee who's completed 45 years or more, required to be 120 days of commencement of the year. Annual health examination need to be conducted as per prescribed by the central government. Safety committee at least once a quarter, and in case of mine, it required minimum once a month. Overtime wages need to be at least double the regular wages, and migrant workmen are also eligible for the overtime wages. When it comes to OSH rules, similar way inspection, as I told you, Form 12 has prescribed as a document for non-compliance and safety arrangements. So this code is talking about a health and working condition. All this has to be maintained by the employer. Women employment during the night between 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. Women are allowed to work during the night with the consent. And adequate transport facility and pickup and drop need to be provided. Welfare facilities and all this, where whatever the amenities provided for the morning shift people, the similar has to be extended for night working women, including the cash facility. And posh applicability, we know that even one women employee engaged during night, the POSH Act will be applicable. ICC committee need to be formed. Journey allowance for interstate migrant workmen, as I told you, once in a year, the employer has to make the to and fro charges, even though if it's not travel, but it is recommended to make the payment to the to and fro journey charges for the interstate migrant workmen. For social security, there is a National Social Security Board for gig worker and platform worker, where the state and central government will part of it. They divided their responsibilities. So the 1% of their turnover, the aggregator's contribution need to be paid. And moreover, the aggregator has to give the database of the gig worker and platform worker to enroll them under the social security schemes. So when it comes to gratuity, we know that the fixed term employees who's completed 1 year service eligible for the gratuity. Every additional completed year of service, part of their exceeding 6 months, eligible for receive the gratuity for 15 days wage for every completed year of service. So the social security crush facility, when the rules, central rule talk about the crush facility, it is in the draft stage. They said that 50 or more women employee need to be maintain the crush. So here previously employee term again turned into women, 50 or more women employee, but it is in the draft stage. Maybe many of the objections were filed for it. We have to wait for the final draft to publish by the central government to get a clarity on this. When it comes to crush facility, crush will be located at appropriate distance. Previously we know that 500 meters or 1000 meters, all this has been removed, and it says that appropriate distance between the employer and employees acceptance. So the facility need to be extended for a woman who's work from home. The crush facility need to be extended for an employee who's taken work from home also. So here it's going to be a bit burden to the employer to arrange a crush facility, who's working from home, maybe the nearby, all this needs to be checked. The rules are silent about the specifies. There is no much clarity has been given, but only the points were noted. Intimation of vacancies. When it comes to year one return, we know that quarterly return, it has been moved to year one annual EIR return in the form of 26. It is annual. It has been made as an annual in place of quarterly. It has become annual, and this return recommended us to file in an online mode. So there may be a chance of state government implementing online portal to notify the vacancies as well to file the annual return in the portal. Provision for electronic mode. Yeah, this we are talking about labor codes, and the draft rules were published under the central rules. When it comes to TeamLease will take care of all the labor codes related compliances for our existing clients as well, wherever the changes are coming, wherever the notifications released, because many of the parts were still unanswered by the central government. There may be a chance that state government may come up with a specific notification and clarification in this matter. So wherever we get an intimation or supporting or documents, we'll be circulating among our clients for time to time. And similar way, we'll move to our question and answer. Before that, I think Prashant sir will take care.
No, in fact, Munab, what you spoke about, I just wanted to reiterate that, see, this is a broad guidelines and details about the codes which we are foreseeing in future. Munab took us through the entire codes, different codes in detail. We are planning to have similar sessions in next 3 to 4 months time. Every month we'll have that, so that you benefit out of this. And we will try to make it sectorial. We'll try to make it specific code wise. And then of course, depending on what responses we get from you, we'll try to create that structure. So this is going to be an ongoing activity month on month. We would like all of you to be part of it. This is absolutely free. There's no charge. I'm sure you'll benefit out of this. But at the same time, I saw a question where somebody was asking, do we provide advisory? Yes, we do provide advisory. The ones who are our client. So since you know that we do end-to-end compliance services, the client or the people who are our client, the advisory is completely free to them. And for those people who want advisory over and above, in case if they are not our client, there's some charge to it depending on the quantum of work. Other questions I was going through, I think we'll start, because of paucity of time, we'll start the question answer. Chandana, would you like to read out the question, or how would you like to take it up? And Munab, then you can take the questions and answers from here.
Yes, Prashant. Yeah. Women working in night shift is an annual return or monthly?
See, there is no return required to be filed under this code. This code preserved that only the consent need to be obtained from the women employee. If women is ready to work in your establishment for the night, if she consent letter, the certain format has been clarified under the draft rule, the format has to be signed by the women employee. In that case, there are certain facilities need to be arranged, as like transportation, the facilities, whichever the amenities provided for the daytime, the similar has to be extended for nighttime, including the crush facility and the security arrangements. POSH committee has to be formed. If POSH committee, if it is not applicable to you, in that case, during the women employment engagement during night, it become a mandatory to have a POSH committee in place for the establishment. So this is the condition. There is not required to get a permission or filing of any returns as per the draft rule published by the central government.
What as we renew the contract, will the gratuity payment applicable during each renewal?
Yeah, see, I think the question is about the fixed term contract. If we extend the contract or we renew the contract, in that case, the gratuity applicability talking about. If it is a one master contract, you will be have for 1 year period. Thereafter, you just extending the contract by giving one additional addendum. You will be adding 1 more year. Likewise, if you are not closing the contract, you just extending the contract. In that case, the employee will be eligible for the continuation wherever you given the addendum for the particular period till you close the agreement. he will be eligible for it. In case the 1 year contract overs, you will be closing down the contract, you will be having a fresh contract with the employee by closing the existing contract, and you will be having a new contract. In this case, it will not continue. In case you will only giving the addendum and you will be postponing the date of closure, date of termination of contract. In this case, this employee will be eligible till the end of termination.
So Komal is asking regarding the wages to be paid within 2 working days for excess. For those who do not complete the formalities and pay the dues, then how it needs to be taken care of? Please advise.
Yeah, see, the legislation is very plain and very clear. If the employee is resigned or terminated, you need to make the payment within 2 working days. Maybe if you have certain liabilities, there may be, if you have a valid evidence for that, in that case, you may hold certain part of amount and you can't hold the entire amount. It is not advisable to hold the entire amount of wages. You have to make certain portion of the payment of that, and you have to payment will be holded for the particular responsibility or particular asset of the company has been with you. Once you hand over it, we will make the payment. Kind of certain communication has to be given to the employee. That will be the right practice.
Any change suggested in the code on the 20 lakh gratuity ceiling?
No, sir, not yet. It is not clarified anything as such. It is existing only. It's remains same.
So a couple of people have asked if we can share the presentation. Yes, we would be sharing it after the webinar. We'll be sharing the recording of the webinar as well as the presentation of the webinar.
Yeah, Chandana, we'll do it. We'll share the presentations.
So the provisions to be deemed as employees of PE of no license has been taken has removed in 2020 version of OSH code. Please check again.
Please come back, Chandana.
The provision to deem CL as employees of PE of no license has been taken and has been removed in 2020 version of OSH code. Please check again. It's not very
deemed approval. I think they're talking about the deemed approval process.
Yeah.
This code not yet come for its existence, not yet notified for its effective implementation. Once it is implemented, thereafter definitely the deemed approval process will be introduced by the central government. So once the application is filed, every application will have certain time limit. After the time limit, the portal will automatically pop up, and the applicant can download the renewed or new applied license through the web portal. That is what the code recommends, deemed approval within given time. So the code not yet implemented. Once the code implemented, thereafter only all the technology platform will be fixed as per the requirement of the legislation.
Will it be compulsory to provide OT payment to an employee working on Sunday or weekly off? Can we provide a compensatory off on other day during the week?
Yeah, the central draft rule very clearly says that overtime payment has to be paid to the employee who worked on weekly holiday. But certainly it is for central rule, which the state, there may be a chance of different opinion from this particular part. There may be a chance of different options may be given by the state government. We need to wait for the state rule to be published on this particular subject. We'll come to know about that. It may differ from state to state. We need to wait.
Can you explain the change in definition and how it will impact the retirement benefits or any other payment to employees?
Yeah, I think it's talking about the wage component of the code on wages. All the 4 codes will have a common definition of wages, which talk about 2 different components. One is wage, one is excluded part. The first part wage, only three components is here. One is basic, another one is DA, another one is retaining allowance. These three components will be constituted as a wages. There are excluded part. The excluded part has been given widely. There are HRA is excluded part, employer contribution of PF, including the NPS, will be the excluded part. When it comes to travel concession is excluded part. When it comes to gratuity is excluded part. When it comes to home accommodation given on subsidiary basis is any commission payable, any bonus, statutory bonus payable, any incentive payable. All these were in the excluded part. The legislation is very clear that other than the retrenchment and gratuity component, all the component of excluded part not to exceed 50%. In this means the legislation pushing the total CTCs 50% to be fixed in only three components, that is basic, DA and retaining allowance. So entire CTC, not in your gross payment, it's talking about your entire CTC. In your entire CTC, 50% you have to fix it in a three components, basic, DA and retaining allowance. So this gratuity calculation, when it comes to retirement benefit, when it comes to gratuity calculation, currently we calculate gratuity only on basic and DA component. But this course were recommended that the gratuity need to be calculated for basic, DA and retaining allowance. That is for your 50% of wages. Currently we'll be calculating for 30 or 40%. Now you have to increase 50% or more than 50% for the gratuity calculation. So certainly the CTC will increase, 100% the CTC will increase. The cost need to be borne by the employer, or there may be a certain adjustment in the wages to support, to reduce the take home of the employee, to adjust the cost for a similar CTC. So here we could see that two changes majorly. One is the gratuity part. Another one is any employee who's less than 15,000 wages. In that case, the employer contribution and the employee contribution of PF may increase. During the restructure, it is very clear that within three components, you have to have 50% of your total wages. There may be a chance that your take home may reduce by way of PF contributions. Similar way, during the restructure, there may be a option of certain tax benefit components may move to non-taxable components. In that case, there may be a chance of higher tax reduction for the employees. These three parameters, we could see that gratuity, employer PF, as well the tax component of the employee may have certain impacts. If employer ready to take up the cost, in that case, the employee's take home will not reduce, but employer cost will increase. When employers stick with the cost CTC, in that case, definitely the employees take home will reduce. So certainly the written document, intimation, all this need to be given to the employees before restructuring the salary components. This is going to be a big headache and big burden for all the establishments.
So Harshida is asking, can we take the services of gig workers without aggregators?
See, if you hire the gig workers or platform worker, in that case, you will be treated as an aggregator, because the aggregator is nothing but the technology person, the platform platform provider for the aggregator or platform worker. You have an online platform to engage a gig worker or platform worker. In that case, you are aggregator. You have to make the contribution. You can't hire the gig worker or platform worker without the aggregator. There is no option.
So there are 2-3 people who want you to elaborate on the definition of wages under the new code.
Yeah, Chandana, we covered this already.
Okay.
I spoken about this.
So one more is it needed to change the CTC as per code if our basic at present is 35%?
Yeah, you need to see that how your wage components accommodated. You need to accommodate, as I told you, two different sets. One set will be talking about the wage part, which is basic DA and retaining allowance. Other part, there is excluded HRA, any travel concession or bonus payable, incentive payable, any commission payable, all this employer EPF contribution, NPS employer contribution, all this you need to put in the other bucket. If it is tally, if your basic DA retaining allowance is 50% or more than 50%, in this case, you no need to restructure your wage component. If it is not telling, definitely once the code comes for its effective date, in that case, you have to restructure your wage component to match the requirement of that particular labor code.
So Sandeep is asking, is there a mobile app for labor updates? Yes, we do have, Sandeep. We have an app called Rules Book. You can download the Rules Book. I'll type the spelling over here. You can. It's available in both Android and App Store. You can download it. Whether software engineers technologies covered under the employee compensation chapter under the new code.
So employee compensation chapter, as of now, it very clearly says that industrial establishment, but industrial establishments were treated only the factories, but certain clarification need to be given by the respective state government. There may be a chance of covering the commercial establishment also in the bracket of industrial establishment. In that case, there may be a chance of covering the retrenchment and layoff, all this for the commercial restaurant, but still subject to state rules. State rule will clarify about this particular subject.
Do we need to obtain consent from workmen to engage him or her on the overtime?
No, for overtime not required. There are prescribed overtime hours will be given in the rule. You not to exceed in a daily or weekly overtime hours. That is sure, but consent is not required as per the rule, draft rules.
So is the new law adapted? If yes, from when?
As per the central ministry, labor ministry, it says that maybe the 1st of April, they want to go all the labor codes in one go. So the draft rule already published, public opinion taken, final reconciliation is happening and corrections we're doing in the draft rules. Maybe the central may go from 1st of April. State governments, very less number of state governments, they started drafting the rules for the labor codes. There may be a chance they may cover the central draft rules or final rule published by the central government for time being till they have their own rules, or certain state governments already started publishing the draft rules. They may go with their own rules, state rules from 1st of April. But certainly we could not predict as of now. But central government very clear that 1st of April will be the implementation date for all the 4 labor codes and all the 4 labor rules of the central government. State government may follow or may get the exempted for certain time period till they publish their rules, or there may be chance of following the central rule for time being. There may be option for the state governments.
Can you please explain the requirement on CTC breakup?
CTC breakup, I think we have covered it. Again, I'm just overwriting the same thing. All the cost, all the components of the cost, which is talking about two parameters. One is your wage, other one is excluded part. This 2 parts has to be in your CTC. The first part will be talking about basic DA and retaining allowance, only 3 components. When it comes to second part, it is excluded. Excluded part in your HRA, any house accommodation given in subsidiary, any commission payable, employer contribution of EPF, NPS payment by the employer, any commission payable, any incentive payable, all these components, including the gratuity, will be in the second part. This all put together will be your CTC. When it comes to excluded part, this other than the gratuity, all other excluded part components not to exceed your 50% of total wages, that is your CTC. In this case, the basic DA retaining allowance, if you fix for 50% or more than 50%, you'll be in the safer side, and it is complied, 100% complied.
Okay, Chandra, last question, and then we will make note of all the questions which are left out. So friends, we'll come back to you for sure because we have your database, we have your mail IDs, numbers and everything. We're anyway going to share the presentation. We are going to discuss, all these questions internally, come back to you with a solution, and we'll be in touch with you. So don't bother in case if you think that your question is not getting answered as of now. It won't be unanswered in future also. We'll answer it and we'll come back to you. We'll be in touch with you. So Chandna, just pick up the last question and then possibly we'll conclude the session.
Okay, Prashant. Can you please elaborate unlicensed contract concept as they will be treated as direct employees? It's from Yasin Patel.
Yeah, sorry, Chandana, please come back.
Elaborate on unlicensed contractor concept as they will be treated as direct employees.
Yes. See, any contractor will you hiring, they have to have a valid license to engage for a contractor. Here, the legislation is very clear that there is an option for a common license by the contractor. Common license. If we have more than one state operation, in that case, the contractor can approach the central government directly. They can avail the common license for engage for a various establishment more than one state. So in this case, what will happen if any contractor engaged by the principal employer, it is the responsibility of the principal employer to collect the copy of the license. If the contractor failed to obtain a license or if he does not have the license, in that case, all the employees working in that particular establishment will be treated as like your regular employees. They may ask for your permanency. There may be a chance of they may go for compensation or for retrenchment or termination or any benefits which is provided to your permanent employees. The similar benefits they have to be availed. They are option to avail. So in this case, it is the responsibility of the principal employer to engage only the licensed contractor or any contractor who's not renewing the license within the time period. They also amount to non-licensed contractor. So the compliance burden for the principal employer to monitor the contractor's compliance has increased. In case if a contractor has a 4 years license and engaging for the 5th year, though he's filed application, it is deemed approval. If he not filed the application, in that case, all the employees engaged through the contractor will be treated as direct employees of the principal employer for the purpose of dispute or compensation or any other benefits. So this is an additional burden to the employers to take care of contractual. Widely, this code, many of the contractors' responsibilities were made clear that the principal employer responsible for the contractor's compliance part. In this, very clear that should have a clear-cut monitor on the contractual part, whether they're making the payment, whether they're giving the leaves, monetary benefits, ESI, PF, all this has to be monitored on time. Failure by the contractor, including the bonus, any payments failure, it is the responsibility of the principal employer to recover certain amount from the contractor and make the payment to the contractual employees. So it is the responsibility of the principal employer.
Okay. Right, Manab, I think great session. So friends, just to reiterate in last 30 seconds, which I would like to talk about. I mean, we could see that on the chat box, Chandana has shared certain, details. We have our rules book, which is a real-time update in terms of what's happening in the entire compliance world. And that's absolutely free for all of you. I mean, it's not only restricted to labor, but it's beyond labor also. So all 7 verticals or vectors are covered in that. So I would urge all of you to please download it. That is very helpful for your business. It can be customized to your sector, business, city, or state. That's one. Second, we have our TeamLeaseCompliance.com, our website. You can visit there. Whatever information you want to bring, pull out, you can see there as well. Other than that, our representatives are there. In case you want to discuss, have an advisory, or want an execution to be done from our side, we are more than happy to do that. We'll be in touch with you for that. And in the last, I'm reiterating that we'll have such sessions in future because these are things which are just unfolding now. We can see by 1st of April, there will be a lot of announcement which will be implemented or executed. And then we'll require a lot of clarity. So for next 2 quarters, we are going to have such session on a monthly basis. I would like all of you to be part of that. I'm sure you're going to benefit out of that. So with that, thank you all for joining, guys. It was lovely speaking in front of you. We'll continue the same thing in future also. Thanks for taking out time. With that, I'm closing the session. Thank you.